Next, right here at the Ministry of Defence, Major General Chapman. Chip, very good evening to you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. You'll know a little bit about the terrain and possibly the threat that they faced in that explosion, the IDF that we're talking about, where 20 or more IDF soldiers were killed. I mean, I'm surprised, I suppose, in a way, Chip, that we haven't seen more of this kind of activity going on inside Gaza, which clearly is very well fortified by Hamas.
Well, I think what would have surprised me, Mike, is that it happened so close to the border. So it was only 600 meters from Israeli territory. So that shows you the complexity of the problem, that if you think you've cleared ground, which then the enemy can re-infiltrate, and this seems to have been two RPGs, rocket-propelled devices, one which hit a tank, and that may have led to a second RPG on the building, which ignited these explosives. So it's this re-infiltration. You can sort of win the war and you can destroy lots of Hamas, and I think the number at the moment they're saying is 9,000. But it's the war after the war with the potential insurgency which comes, which is the real dilemma for the Israelis, particularly when everyone potentially could be a guerrilla in the future. I've actually been to Gaza, and it is very dense terrain, which is very difficult, and urban operations are the most complex operation, not only the urban operation, but it's the subterranean urban world which Hamas have built over the last few years. So it's a real complex problem, which will take them, or would take them, a long time to sort out. And from their perspective, both Hamas and Israel, they see this as an existential war. So sometimes we have to be careful that our framing bias is not that of a Western power saying surely they'll negotiate and they'll negotiate soon. That may not be the case when you've got two sides which are pretty energized because of the events which have happened both on October the 7th and which have happened subsequently from the end of October with the Israeli actions in Gaza.
Well, quite. And neither one of those sides wants a two-state solution. So as many politicians that want to suggest it, it's all very well, but neither one of them actually wants to get there. So I suspect that won't be the solution for what they want to do either. Let's talk about Rishi Sunak today in the House of Commons talking about the Houthis. You know, a lot of people tell me that there's nothing really that the Britons or the American forces can do to stop the Houthis because they've kind of already won the war in the Red Sea because an awful lot of ships commercially are not going there anymore.
I don't think that's necessarily true. What the action is supposed to do is to deter and get them to desist. And I think the international community is actually largely on the side of that being the case. This is vital interest, not just for the UK, but for every trading state around the world. So the first piece of evidence for that is United Nations Security Council Resolution 2722, which told the Houthis to cease their campaign, and the Security Council there, 11 voted for, and China and Russia abstained. They didn't vote against it. China is against the actions of the Houthis because it impacts their economy. You can see that in the way that the spot rates of the containers have gone up, for example, and the 20-foot equivalent unit, the TEU, is the price of a freight truck to go, or freight 40-foot freight truck to go across on a container. The rates for that have gone up, the spot rate for each one, from $1,400 prior to the Houthi action starting in November to $3,777 now. And the complexity of the international economy means that if things get delayed, then that affects not just UK, the EU, but it really affects China more. The second largest trading partner is the EU. All the EU trade to China goes through the Suez Canal, or normally should go through the Suez Canal. It's also worth saying the EU on the 16th of January have looked at a defensive operation to escort vehicles, something based on a thing which is already kind of there called Atalanta, and that will take some time to get into fruition should it come to bear. And that might be a kind of halfway solution because you've got to remember at the start, Operation Prosperity Guardian was just a defensive operation. In baseball terms, it was the catch, but sometimes you're not always going to be successful in the catch. And sometimes in baseball, you've got to pitch. That's what the UK and the Americans did with the first action on the 11th of January. And then the subsequent action by the UK today was the 8th action. It's also worth saying, though, that why did the Brits not get involved in the sort of actions 2 to 7 which occurred And that's the difference in targeting. The UK, with its capability based in Cyprus, can only get involved in deliberate targeting, what we really call a sort of air toss, in order to take on targets. What the Americans do, because their capability is far, far in excess of the UK, is also do dynamic targeting. So that means via their satellite power and their persistent surveillance, because they've got a large drone presence in Djibouti, opposite the sort of Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea, they can see in real time the launches almost being readied, and that's the ones that they've taken out between Operation 1 and Operation 8.
And would you say, Chip, that the region itself is under so much pressure at the moment? Because, you know, an awful lot of security experts are telling me, you know, it's not just the Houthis in the Red Sea, it's not just Gaza, it's not just Iran, it's not just Lebanon, it's not just Syria. You know, there's activity going on all the time. I mean, we saw Iran firing some missiles at Pakistan the other day. You know, there does seem to be a sense that the whole region is kind of a tinderbox at the moment.
That's true, but I would always say that really since the Arab Spring, we've been looking at sort of 6 armies and 6 wars. The 6 armies which have been created by Iran are the Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthi, the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, the Liwa Fatah Mayun, which is a Afghan militia, Shia militia, which has been fighting for them in Syria, and another militia called the Liwa Zanabiyab, a Pakistani Shia, which has been fighting for Iran to keep Assad in power. And the 6 really wars that you've had since 2011 are Shia versus Sunni, Assad versus the rebels, Turks versus the Kurds, because the Turks also whacked some PKK a couple of weeks ago, Iran versus Israel, Israel versus Hamas and Hezbollah, and everyone versus IS. And I haven't even mentioned Al-Qaeda within that mix. So I don't think it's a war of scale in the way that we look at Ukraine, but there certainly are a number of incidents. So I'm not one of these who goes towards we're heading towards World War III. And one thing about Iran is they're not mad mullahs. They've also got their own internal problems, and they would not want to confront the Americans because of those internal problems. The first one is women, life, freedom, the protest movement which has gone on there. They can't mobilize their people in the way that they could, for example, between the 1980-88 war between Iraq and Iran. The second one is a large proportion of Sunni people in the Middle East hate the Shia and see the Iranians as a Persian imperialism. Certainly, there are rejectionist groups in Syria which would say that. And thirdly, the attacks that you saw on the border with the Pakistan assault into Iran, and actually the attack by ISK in Khorasan province, one of the eastern provinces, show you that there are also centrifugal forces in Iran where there are ethnic tensions in their periphery which could break apart if they were to go in the war. And there's a number of those: Khuzestan, Kurdistan, Baluchistan. So Iran don't have it all their own way in sort of this. They can use their proxies very well, but it's a significant problem which confronts them as well as everyone else. They'll fight to the last Houthi. They won't fight to the first Iranian.
No, interesting stuff. Chip, great to talk to you. Thank you very much